Start to read. Okay, we're in progress, whatever. I guess I learned to say progress when I came to Canada. And process and progress, and not process and progress. Okay. The language is an amazing thing. Winston Churchill was said to have said something like, I'm not quoting him exactly, but the Americans and British are people divided by the same language, something along those lines.
We have a lot of different pronunciations for sure.
Well, it's pronunciations, it's terminology, the boot, the bonnet, trunk versus the hood and the hood.
Do you find being an American when you came here, Americans say, Canadians say a boot, but I've never heard that.
A boot?
Yes.
Out in the boat?
Up and about. But they say we say a boot.
I don't
I've never heard it before.
I don't know. I have enough problems just trying to pronounce the words that I can pronounce, I told you the story last week about how I met my wife. She insulted Southern accents. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. This week we have for the Torah portion Kedoshim. Since it's a leap year, it's not attached to Achrei Mot, which most years it is. Kadoshim to you, you shall be holy, for I am holy. The word kadosh is an interesting word. The shoresh, the basic root of it, kuf daled shin, which has the meaning of holy and separate. That which is holy is separate and distinct. To be holy means to be set apart. When a wedding takes place, the language that the groom says to the bride, tradition is Hare at mikudeshet li. You are sanctified to me, set apart to me. And in the language which is patriarchal, I recognize that the language is that she is now set apart from every other man in the world except for her husband. And hopefully today the couple both feel they're set apart from the rest of the world except one for the other in terms of their intimacy that they have. So Kadoshim says that why should we be kadosh? Why should we be holy? Because God is holy. The term in Latin is imitatio Dei, imitating God. We are to imitate God to the best of our ability. Now, how can we imitate God? We're not gods, but as the rabbi said, God feeds the hungry, clothes the naked, etc. So should we do those actions? We should treat them that way. And I think in a sense, what it does is says that when we do these things, we are acting for God. If somebody needs help and we help them, that is an act of godliness. So we become God's instrument in doing those actions. So Kedusha has the meaning of certain things that we perform. It means avoidance of things that are not considered to be moral and proper. That is the basic subject matter of the parsha of Kedoshim, of being holy, of being special that way. It was very interesting. There is this concept I'm sure I mentioned it before, what called Daf Yomi, where every day throughout the world, people study the same folio page of the Talmud. Okay, so that wherever you may go, if you keep up with the Daf Yomi, you can, everybody's doing it. Around the world, somebody is on the same page with you. And right now, it's talking about the concept of we just finished, of loaning money with interest. The Torah forbids a Jew to lend money to a fellow Jew with interest. We are allowed to lend money to somebody who's not Jewish at interest. In the Middle Ages, it was often is a great way. The Christian might lend the Jew, who might turn around and lend a Christian, or the Jew might lend a Christian who turns around and lends the Jew, another Jew. And those are all interest-bearing loans. But why? What's the? And so the lecture that I was listening to talking about, he says, when the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, starts dealing with the subject matter, it strangely enough doesn't talk about saying what you cannot charge interest, when you cannot, but when you can, to somebody who's not part of the family, someone who's outside the Jewish world. To say there's nothing intrinsically wrong with charging interest, it's just that we are supposed to help our fellow Jew. And if somebody needs help, we shouldn't be profiting from giving them that help. So Maimonides, when he talks about levels of tzedakah, the highest levels to help a person earn a living. So the idea of making money from money, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, you start gouging people, all right, that's a different story. But it's the idea that you are dealing with your family, your friends, your community. And therefore, when you're dealing with your community, you have an obligation to help without you making money off of it. And believe me, the whole discussion, my head was spinning with each day by the time I'm end of that page of the different things that the rabbi said. No, you really could do it, but we don't allow you to do it because it looks like it's charging interest and everything. For example, if I lend you money, and you don't know me but you needed to borrow money, and I lent you money, and normally you'd walk by me without ever saying hello. You're not allowed to start saying hello to me, because it looks like you're saying hello to me only because I lent you money. And that's like kind of giving me interest on the loan. But then it comes down to the bottom line, though, is we have the obligation to help those within our community and outside of our community as well. So that it makes very clear in the law codes that we have to give charity to the poor of all nations, of all peoples. We have to help people out, et cetera. So that right now, with all this controversy that's going on and the issue of Gaza and everything, there are Jews on both sides. And some of them rightfully do suggest that they believe their understanding of Jewish laws, that they have to care about the people in Gaza, which I think everybody should. The question is, what do you do and how you deal with it? That's subject to how you think it's the best way, what have you, and the way out. But certainly what's going on is horrible for everybody involved with it. The people in Gaza, the Israelis who are being held still captive in Gaza, all those things. I'm going afield. I shouldn't. Okay, let's put an end to that discussion, and we will. I'm not putting it to death, but we are going to talk about death. The human being. I can't. We can't speak for other species around us, but we are very much aware of death. How we deal with death and what we consider death to be is a challenge to our own sense of being. How we see ourselves, how we see the world around us, is tied in with this concept. And every civilization, every religion has various understandings of what death is, what happens to the person when they die, and as well what should be done for the person who has died and what has to be done for the survivors of the person who died. Okay? And so ritual, Jewish ritual surrounding death is built on, one, the theology of what death means, but also on how we show respect to the person who has died and how we show respect and comfort for those who have lost a loved one. So all of those are contained within the rubric of death and mourning. Let's talk a little bit about theology, and then we'll get into the religious practice. When you look in the Bible, let's take the Torah to start with. The second paragraph of the Shema makes very clear that the ideal that is being expressed is this worldly reward and punishment. If you will listen to the words which I command you this day, take them to heart, follow what you're supposed to do, then you will be rewarded. Since it's an agrarian society, it's okay, don't worry. The format of what the reward is what a farmer needs. A farmer would want, a shepherd would want, right? And we have no mention in the Torah of anything else. Nowhere does the Torah make reference to any other concept except for reward and punishment in this world. Right? That central prayer of Judaism, the Shema, is very this worldly. We have intimations of a concept of something that may exist after this world. We have the famous story after King Saul and Samuel have parted ways, and Samuel dies. Saul wants to get approbation, help from Shmuel, who's dead, and so he goes to a necromancer. That's the fancy word for it. The Witch of Endor, which somehow got into Star Wars. All right, but she's a necromancer. She calls up the dead. So something, it comes to her, and we can't know for sure what exactly is transpiring, and all you have to do is go to a seance, right? And you get these charlatans, and I have a spirit. The spirit has come, and I think it's someone who was related to you. Is that my mother? Oh yeah, it's your mother. Okay. And I was just thinking about this today. I used to be a very big science fiction reader and fantasy readers. All right, so a number of different fantasy series will have these entities that get summoned up, and they speak and tell you secrets about the world or what have you. All right, so Samuel, the best way of describing is a shade or a ghost, but we don't know what he was doing, feeling, being before he called up to King Saul, and after he goes back. We have nothing. We have in the book of Ezekiel, Yechezkel, we have the vision of the dried bones. Okay? And in the vision of the dried bones, God says to Yechezkel, Ezekiel, what do you see? He sees these bones. He says, can they come back to life? And basically he says, only you know. And so the bones knit together and they become living beings once again. But that's not described as the normative process of life. Okay? We do have a reference in the book of Daniel about some going down to the earth, to the grave, never coming back, and some do. So the only place anywhere in the Bible where you can really see any idea of something besides being born and dying in this world and something happening later on is in the book of Daniel. And modern Bible critics all assume that the book of Daniel is very late and it's not written by by Daniel himself, and it comes from around the time of the Maccabees, which tells you at least by that period in history, the idea of the resurrection of the dead has become part and parcel of Jewish ideology. So what develops is an idea that when you die, you have the opportunity at some point at the end of history, or either tied with the age of the Messiah or after the Messiah. All of that is all very confused, to be honest. You're restored to life. Whether or not that's eternal, whether that's for a period of time, are you going to die again? None of that is clear, spelled out in the rabbinic sources. So now the first question you have to ask yourself is, why all of a sudden do we have this develop? If you believe it was always part and parcel of Jewish theology, that's fine. But for most of us to see a development of some kind of evolution, the question, what do you need it for? God says you'll be rewarded. If you do good, you'll be rewarded. If you do bad, you'll be punished. I made $1 million. I must have been very good. I lost everything, my fortune. I must have been very, you're shaking your head, of course. Life doesn't work that way. And that's what the book of Job is dealing with. Why the good suffer, righteous suffering. And the theory is that eventually this idea, well, there was this in the back of the mind, some kind of shadowy existence, perhaps like the Greek Hades kind of thing. It wasn't something you really looked forward to. So maybe those souls that were there during that time after death can be restored to a physical body, so that those who did good will be rewarded and those who did bad will be punished. So you say, what kind of sense does that make? So the metaphor used by the rabbis in the Talmud is, there's a king once who had this wonderful orchard, beautiful fruit. He wanted to protect it, but the watchmen aren't so good at watching. They watch each other eat the fruit. So what is he going to do? So he comes up with a brilliant idea. He's going to hire 2 watchmen. One's lame and the other's blind. Okay? So, but between the 2 of them, they can watch the orchard, but they're not going to be able to steal the fruit. So then one day the 2 of them get to talking, and they come, you know what? If the lame man gets on the shoulders of the blind man and he directs them where to walk, they can get the fruit. So sure enough, they get some fruits. And the king comes by and he sees fruits missing. And the lame man says, don't look at me. I can't reach the fruit. And the blind man says, don't look at me. I can't see the fruit. So how can I steal it? And not being a dummy, he said, I know what you did. So he puts the lame man back on the shoulders of the blind man and beats him like that. So it is with a body and soul. The body says, God, what are you blaming me for sin? I have no volition. I can't do I direct myself to anything. I'm just flesh and bone. And the soul says, what do you look at me? I can't do anything. I have no physical capacity. So God puts the soul back into the body, reward and punishment. Okay? That's called Techiyat HaMetim, or Techiyas HaMesim, depending upon what circles you're in. Okay? Resurrection of the dead. And that's why when we come to the Christian story of the resurrection of Jesus, it's not outlandish story to people. If they didn't believe at all in the concept of resurrection, then this idea that somebody who was killed and came back to life, that would really have set up been a big deal. But it happens. We read about Elisha restoring some life a child in the Bible. These things happen. So of course, but that's why it was, at least it was an acceptable concept. How it develops is not for us to deal with right now. Okay. But that doesn't satisfy everyone, especially people of a more philosophical bent. After all, especially with the impact of Greek philosophy, well, the Rambam later on, 1,000 years later, it talks about the fact that what is the ideal? What is it for the philosopher? What is the ideal existence? Contemplating God, or thought, the processes. What gets in the way of that? The physical body. Why would you want to come back? Wouldn't you just want to have some kind of existence, purely spiritual existence, where the body didn't get in the way of all of what you needed to wanted to do? So you have two different ideas that seem to develop, I know, simultaneously, with how they develop and when they is open to question. But you had resurrection of the dead, and you have the concept of the immortal soul. God, the soul that you placed in my body is pure, is one of the prayers you're supposed to recite in the morning. And I know you're going to take it away from me, and sometime in the future you will restore it. Okay? So the spiritual construct and the physical construct, both are there, and they get intertwined, and how the various theologians and philosophers put them all together is a fascinating issue. Some say you'll have resurrection of the dead, and then the dead die, and the soul then goes on for eternity. Others say that the soul part of it is until the resurrection, and the resurrection comes, and then the resurrected body lives forever. Maimonides doesn't agree with that, but there are various ways of trying to resolve and put them together. Both of those concepts exist in Jewish tradition. Modern people, we today kind of poo-poo the resurrection of the dead, the physical resurrection. That's that just it doesn't answer our needs. All right. But it's part and parcel of Jewish tradition. The first, in the Amidah, after Magen Avraham, you are the one who restores the dead to life. Now, you can interpret that for the heavenly existence, but that's not what it's saying. It's talking about physical resurrection. And that's why in some Siddurim in Reform, they do not use that terminology, because they don't want to, they don't believe in it, so they don't want to put it there. Others just kind of, it's there, we say it, but we don't really emphasize it. Okay. Now, what about this reward and punishment? Well, if you believe in the resurrection of the dead, and you see it as the metaphor that I gave before about the blind man and the lame man in the garden, okay, you understand. If you saw, in the world to come, when the resurrection comes about, you get what is basically a physical reward and punishment. But the spiritual side of it doesn't work with that after all. So there develops the idea that everyone does good and bad in this world. And we have to atone in some way for the bad. We have to be rewarded by God in some way for the good. So if it doesn't balance out in this world, that's where the idea of Gehenna comes from, for lack of a better English term, hell. So every soul after death has to go through a process of atonement. If their good far outweighs their bad, okay, it's a short term. If their bad is worse than their good, it's a long term. If they are really righteous and no sin, which is not very probable, you dip your toe in Gehenna, I guess. Okay? If you're really so bad that a year punishment in Gehenna is not sufficient, there are two possibilities. One, the average no good guy or gal, their soul is snuffed out. That's it. They've suffered all, God doesn't punish you forever that way. However, if you are one of the real choice villains of history, a Hitler, Yamach Shemo V'zichrono, for example, you may spend eternity in hell. I don't even know if that would apply to anybody, right? But that's the idea. So now let's take it back to the world in which we live. So I see this righteous guy, a really righteous person. Everything goes bad for them. So what am I supposed to make of it? Since no one is without sin, and everyone has to have some kind of atonement, their sins are being paid for in this world. So when they pass on, all they got to look forward to is reward. On the other hand, if you see some no good Nick and everything seems to go right for them, well, the opposite. Everybody does something good. There's nobody doesn't do anything good. So they get their reward here and now. So all they got left to look forward to is punishment in the world to come. Does that answer it for you? It depends. Some people say that answers the problem for them. Others, I don't understand that. How does that explain a child suffering and all these things? I don't have answers to that. But that's the attempt to try and bridge the gap between belief in a God who is good, a God who rewards for goodness and punishes for evil, and the world in which we live, in which seems to be more complicated than that. Now, another way of trying to explain it and defending the traditional theology is what is it that God wants of us? The Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, praised be, he wants us to follow his mitzvot, do good, be holy, as I started when it's the beginning of the evening, of our own free will. He doesn't want robots. He wants people who choose to do what is right. Now, if every time I did something that was right, candy popped out of the air, well, I like candy, so I'll keep doing whatever it is that gets me candy. So am I doing it because it's the right thing to do? Am I doing it because I want to serve God? Or am I doing it because I'm one of these rats in the experiment, Skinner's rats. We still know about Skinner, right? And conversely, if I did something wrong, I get a zap. Well, I'm not going to do that again. I don't want to get zapped. But do I avoid it because it's wrong? Or do I avoid it because I'm going to get zapped? So if reward and punishment came right here now, immediately when we're doing things, that would not create an entity that has free will, has the choice to choose between good and evil, and chooses good because it is good and because God demands it, and avoids evil because it is wrong and God tells us not to do what is wrong. Not because as soon as I do something wrong, I'm going to get a zap. Okay? So the human being is not a robot. It's not like a train on a track. The trains are powerful vehicles. They can pull, how much loads on the track, but they have to stay on the track. They can't go anywhere but where the track is. But you've got a nice off-road vehicle, right? With big wheels and you go wherever you want to go. Track, no track, you go wherever you want to go. So if you follow the straight and narrow because there's a track there, that's no big deal. But if you follow the straight and narrow because it's the straight and narrow and that's what you want to do, that's a big deal. So we have this idea that there is a physical element to our being. There is a spiritual element to our being, our neshama. The physical element eventually returns to the earth. The spiritual element, we say, returns to God for whatever comes after this life. The resurrection of the dead, Olam Haba, the world to come, heaven, for lack of a better term. That is the theology behind, the ultimate theology. We're supposed to do good. If we do good, we will ultimately be rewarded. We're supposed to avoid evil. If we do evil, we will ultimately be punished. Everyone does good. Everyone does evil. The books have to balance out in the end. And if in the end they balance out, then you get your ultimate reward. Whatever, you may have different levels. If you're a really good guy, you get a nice big mansion in the sky. And the story goes about the rabbi he dies and he goes to heaven and he's being directed by an angel and he shakes him. And this is where you're going to live. He says it's a nice house, a little house that he's going to live in. And he sees next door a mansion. And the rabbi says, I was a good guy, a good man. Why do I have this little house? What did this guy over there do to deserve the mansion? He says, he was a bus driver. He was a bus driver. He gets a mansion and I get a little hovel? And he says, yeah. What did you do? I gave sermons. I got people to pray. Maybe, a little bit. So the bus driver got a lot more people praying. Okay. So, and by the way, and one of the things, especially, what is heaven? Olam Haba, Gan Eden. Usually in Jewish tradition, the terminology uses Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. What is it? What makes something paradise? Now, in Jewish tradition, especially the more the standard line of thought, what you learn Torah. We're supposed to learn Torah. Torah is supposed to be the most important element in life. You have to earn a living, yeah. When you're not earning a living, you should be learning Torah. Okay? So what is heaven? It's sitting at the footstool of God and learning Torah. I like to tell people when my oldest son was a teenager, and he was told that he's going to sit at the footstool of God learning Talmud for eternity, he would have thought it was hell. And now that he teaches Talmud and he has a little shul and he's got that's heaven. And you have to prepare yourself. If you go to a lecture and you know the basics and you learn something from the lecture, you gain from it and you enjoy it. If you go to a lecture and you don't know what it's about, what kind of enjoyment is, I know there's a concept of quantum mechanics, but believe me, I don't want to sit in a lecture about the mathematics and all of this kind of stuff. I can listen to somebody who brings it down to us ignoramuses level. So you have to I can't know and don't want to try and say what it is. I do believe each one of us, now this is my personal, nobody has to answer this on a test. My personal belief is each one of us has an element that's who we are. That spark within us is who we essentially are. And that has a connection to the divine. And when we leave this world and we leave this life, somehow that connection to the divine is taken back by the divine. What that means, I have no idea. I don't think it matters. It shouldn't matter. If we're supposed to lead a goodly life because it's the right thing to do, then it shouldn't matter if we get rewarded for it. If there is reward that comes after, wonderful. It's an icing on the cake. But the cake is doing what's right and doing it here in this world, no matter what, the best we can. All right. So now, how does that tie in with how we deal with the dead? And how do we deal with the living who have lost somebody? Let's talk about the dead first. While we say that the essence of the individual is their neshama, that spark inside of them, nonetheless, it is contained within a physical body. And that physical body deserves respect. It was the holder of the soul, of the neshama. So Jewish tradition is one, we show utter respect to the body of a deceased. We do nothing that would disgrace that body. Since ultimately, as the Bible describes it, God creates the first human being from the dust of the earth, we are to return in a natural process to the dust of the earth. So anything that we might do that would hasten the decomposition of the human body or delay the normal decomposition, I can't get it out right now, right? Of the body is forbidden. We know that in ancient days, we have this from the archaeology, that the normative burial practice was to have burial caves. And in the caves would be carved out like shelves or benches around the outer of the chamber. And when somebody was deceased, their body was placed on that slab and allowed to go the way of all flesh. When the flesh was no longer there, everything had corrupted away. There was a pit in the middle of the room of that cave in which the bones were then deposited. So to be gathered to your ancestors was literal. At least that's how some see it. Later on, there arose a tradition, instead of placing the bones in a central pit, they would make boxes out of the stones, in which the bones would then be placed in that. That's why, again, it's good reference. When we talk about in the New Testament story about Jesus, that's why he's placed in a burial cave. That was exactly the concept of what was going to take place. And the stone was rolled in front. That's how they sealed up the cave. To roll a stone, or had a wheel-like kind of stone that would cover the opening of the entranceway into the grave. Yeah. We do know also at some point in time, we find that they would make individual caskets out of stone again in the earth. They have in Beit Sha'arim, burial caves from the rabbinic period. And you can see some of these caskets. And interestingly enough, a lot of the caskets have Greek names. They didn't use their Hebrew was not necessarily inside stone. And then as time went by, there came the idea of burial in the earth. So first, so the way the human body is properly interred means in some way being put into the earth, either in a cave, which means it's underground, in a grave that you would dig out, and the body was allowed to decompose naturally. That's why in Jewish tradition, we do not permit embalming. The whole purpose of embalming is to preserve the body. And there may be religious traditions that's meaningful, but for Jewish tradition, that it's meaningless. It's actually going against what the divine desire is, that we return to the earth. Now, in most countries in Europe, North America, the body is placed in a casket, a wooden casket. And then you will see there's discussion about whether or not you can have nails in the casket. Really, the fact of the matter is, according to some of the great poskim, you can. But today, if you ask for an Orthodox casket, it will be basically plain pine boards that are pegged together. They use pegs to hold it together. So there's no metal involved with it at all. The body, what happens is when a person dies, first of all, they're not supposed to be left alone. They're supposed to have a guard, a shomer. Now, originally, the shomer had a very clear, necessary purpose to guard the body, simply from rats and other vermin. Today, it's a sign of respect and honor. The traditions of the Chevra Kadisha, the Holy Society, will take care of the body. It's usually today it's mostly run through funeral homes. Here we have Jewish ones that are available. Sometimes in some communities where I've been, we used a non-Jewish funeral home, but we had a Chevra Kadisha that took care of it. Men for men and women for women. The body is cleansed, washed. There's a ritual purification. Usually it's just pouring water over the body that's been washed. Before washing the body, first of all, the body is covered. You uncover only those parts of the body that are going to be washed. So that modesty is kept as part of the ritual. So when men take care of men, women take care of women. The body's only uncovered enough to allow for what is necessary. Once that has taken place, the body is washed, either in some places they do have a mikveh. Most places today they take water and pour over the body. Then the body is dried off. There are clothes we call tachrichin, burial shrouds. For men, basically, it's a pair of pants, it's a shirt, a kittel. Some have a hood that covers the whole head, and the hands and feet are covered as well. The woman also will have a kind of pants, but also a skirt, apron that is attached. And then the man will be wrapped in his tallis if he has one. And one of the tzitzit, one of the four corners, the tzitzit are cut off. So it's not no longer a kosher talit. And then normally they'd be placed in a casket, okay? Preferably a plain wood, no fancy schmancy Cadillacs. By the way, funeral homes make their money off the caskets. They make the money off the embalming. They make their money off of the cosmetics, and they make their money off the gold-plated Cadillacs. You wouldn't put your mother in a Chevy. It has to be a Rolls Royce, a Mercedes, a bit whatever. So then at the cemetery, it depends upon the cemetery, depends upon the nature of the land that's there. Some places you have to have a kind of a lining on the side, otherwise the graves collapse right away. Some places that is not a problem, and so there's just the dirt there. The casket is placed on the bottom, and dirt is placed on top. In Israel and in some communities, you won't see it here, I don't believe. There may be a casket in which the body is carried to the cemetery, but then the casket is taken apart and the body is left in the earth without a casket. And the dirt is placed directly on the body, which some people find very difficult. And that's why caskets pretty much exist today. But if in Israel they don't, or they use a casket to transport the body to the cemetery if they're going to use one. And then once the body is interred in the earth, it should not be moved except really absolute necessity. And it has to be a really, there's going to be a flood, and the cemetery is going to be washed away, what have you. So therefore, they're moving the bodies for that. And one of the major questions that in early 20th century rabbis had to deal with was whether or not bodies could be reinterred for various reasons and whatnot have you. All right. So from the time the person is passed, the body is not left alone. The body is, under normal circumstances, washed, cleansed, placed in tachrichin, burial shrouds, coffin, placed in the earth. If there is an accident, for example, somebody, God forbid, is in an accident and there might be blood, the blood is part of the human being. So that blood they try to collect it. And sometimes it means that the person would be buried in the bloody clothes under certain circumstances. Issues come up about people who die in surgery or die in the hospital where they got various kinds of tubes and everything like that. The preference is not to remove them. All right, so now, Rabbi, what about transplants? And that is what was, and still is a controversial subject. A living donor is not as controversial. If you want to donate your kidney, apparently they can donate half of your liver. Okay, if you choose to do so, that's a mitzvah, a nice thing you can do. You're not obligated in any shape or form. What about heart transplants? Now, when it comes to heart transplants in this area, it becomes a subject matter. How do you define death? What is the physical death? Now, biblically, the only thing that was known was respiration. If you're breathing and your heart's beating, you're alive. If those two things aren't going on, you're dead. So we find this mentioned in the Talmud. If a person is in a building that collapses on Shabbos, you have to dig them out. You want to save their life. If you reach their nostrils coming from the top and they're no longer breathing, you stop. Because there's no obligation to remove the body on Shabbos. And if you start from the feet end, you dig up till the nose. All right, so the idea of respiration, which was pretty much the general theory in the world until recent history, was the definition of death. If you're breathing on your own, you're alive. If you're not breathing on your own, well, you're dead. Well, first of all, we started to come up with things such as respirators. Pumps oxygen into the body. The heart's still beating. You're breathing through a machine. Heart and lung machines, where they take care of everything. They oxygenate the blood. They pump it through you. When we do a heart surgery, are you alive or dead? Your heart's not beating. You're not breathing on your own. Should you say a blessing, a resurrection of the dead when you come out of surgery? No, obviously not. So it's a big debate area. According to some major authorities, if you have what is known as brain death, no autonomic responses, you cannot breathe on your own. Your heart will not pump on its own. You have no reflexes. You're forget what it's called right now, but part of your brain stem is just not functioning any longer. You're dead. Okay? And if you are on machinery to keep the blood circulating and everything, you're still dead. And to prove this, there's a logical principle that's called psik resha. Psik resha means cutting off the head. If you have a chicken and you cut off its head, it may keep running for a few steps. That's a dead chicken. It's not alive. It's dead. So they took an animal, a sheep, hooked it up to a heart and lung machine, removed its head. By the Talmudic definition of psik resha, which is a logical construct based upon the, it must be, if that's it, you're dead. But blood's flowing, the heart's pumping because of all of this. So a lot of authorities permit one to harvest organs under those circumstances. I have a card. It's a halachic organ donor society, HODS, in which you have permission to use my organs if that's what happens. But because I've had cancer, it's not going to happen anyway. Okay. And I think it's legitimate. Some authorities say no. Some permitted cornea transplants because once you're dead and the cornea can last a while enough to take it. So you talk to your rabbi and make sure you have your partner, whoever has medical authority and right, all of that, knows exactly what your wishes are in that department. Okay. All right. So we've taken care of the body. We now have a ritual. What do we do in terms of ritual? Well, I talked about washing the body. We traditionally will recite Psalms as part of the burial service. Once, when the body is interred at the cemetery, there's a special passage called Siduk Hadin that is recited. We may say the Amalei Rachamim, another prayer for the dead. The prayer that most people are aware of is the Kaddish. The Kaddish is not a prayer for the dead. Actually, at the cemetery, there's a special Kaddish that can be recited. Most people don't know how to do it. They break their teeth, so it's not recited. When my parents, both of them, passed away, it was at a time when you didn't say that Kaddish, so I didn't say it either. That does reference the dead. But the normal Kaddish that we say is praise of God. Yitgadal v'yitgadash, yitgadel v'yitgadel, whatever. May the name of the Lord be magnified and sanctified. When a person says those words, the community that is listening responds by saying, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mivorach Le'olam Lamei Maya. All right? That's the sanctification of the name of God in public. That's what Kaddish is. The purpose of Kaddish is for the people there to respond with Yehei Shmei Rabbah. Now, unfortunately, and this is an old thing in Jewish world, it's not just a modern issue. Kaddish has become ingrained in the minds of people as a prayer for the dead. And you have to have you want to make sure you have a Kaddish, or somebody's going to say Kaddish for you. Now, so that because it's the sanctification in the name of God in public, any prayer that's regarded as Kedushat Hashem, sanctifying God, requires the presence of a minyan. However you count a minyan, right? Whatever your community considers to be a minyan, that is what the tradition says you should do. Have a minyan present. I don't go very often, but there's a whole group associated in Thornhill that will make sure there's a minyan available to funerals. Okay, so Kaddish can be recited. And even Kaddish is not recited, so there's a minyan there for them. Now, the purpose of Kaddish, though, there is this idea that the recitation of Kaddish has a mystical effect on the soul of the deceased. And when somebody says Kaddish, they, in some manner or form, impact the person who has died. If they're in Gehenna getting punished, it takes, it gives them a few extra merits versus the demerits. In Sephardic heritage, they suggest it raises the soul higher in heaven. So there is an element to Kaddish that I call the mystical element. And the mystical element is on behalf of the deceased. And as long as somebody is saying Kaddish on their behalf, they get a benefit from it. That's why you'll have people paying others to say Kaddish. On the other side of this story, Kaddish clearly has something for the living. When a person says Kaddish for their loved one, they feel empowered in some way. And it does something for the person saying Kaddish. So there are two sides. There's the mystical for the deceased, and there is this spiritual, I'm not sure what the exact words are for it, for the living who recite the Kaddish. So now, if the important element is the mystical, there are other things you can do on behalf of the deceased. You can learn Torah, study some kind of Jewish religious book. And I'm asked them, people come to me and say, Rabbi, we're going on vacation. There's no synagogue anywhere around. Can I say Kaddish? My answer is no. If you don't have a minyan, you cannot say Kaddish. What are you supposed to take a Jewish book with you, read a chapter or two in their name, their honor. Take a Bible, read a chapter of the Bible, learn a Mishnah. If you're up to it, learn some Talmud. If not, an English book that talks about Judaism and Jewish history. Learn something, which means you're performing a mitzvah on behalf of the deceased. What is the thing the deceased cannot do? They cannot perform mitzvot. Lo hametim yahaluluya v'lo kol yordei duma. The dead cannot praise you, nor those who go down silently to the grave. We understand the world of mitzvot is in the world of the living. The world of mitzvot doesn't exist in the world of the dead. That's why it's custom that one is supposed to tuck in. If one wears their tzitzit out normally, at the cemetery, you tuck them in so they're not showing. So it's not saying, I can wear tzitzit and you dead body, you can't wear tzitzit. It's like you're mocking them almost. Right? As important as Kaddish is, it's not the end all and be all. It is important. It has effects in many different ways. But anything that you do as a mitzvah on behalf of the deceased is also important. And so I tell people, if you want to hire, especially, for people who aren't terribly religious, it will say, if you can't say, yeah, you can hire somebody to say, but whenever you can, if you're not a real shul goer, you don't go all the time, you don't go twice a day to shul, when you can, go to the synagogue, participate in the service, and say Kaddish. When you can't, you can't. But that connection for you and the deceased. So the tradition is in Ashkenazic circles, we say Kaddish for 11 months. Because the period of time in Gehenna is no more than 12 months. And and I'll come back to we mourn for in a minute, but you're not going to say your parents going to be in Gehenna for the whole term. They got to get let out on good behavior sometime before the 12 months. They're not that bad of people, unless they really were, in which case you'd say Kaddish the whole time. The Sephardim, because they understand Kaddish, they have a raising the soul higher in the Olam Haba, they say Kaddish for 11 months. And then afterwards, on the anniversary, which is called Yiddish, the Yartzeit, the anniversary date of their death, according to the Hebrew calendar, one is supposed to say Kaddish in the synagogue as well. And traditionally light memorial candles at home, some fast on the Yartzeit, and say Kaddish. Also, when in the synagogue service, when there is the Yizkor service, we remember our deceased and recite prayers for the dead. All right. So, whom are you supposed to mourn? For whom are you supposed to mourn? So, based on a passage in the Torah talking about who a Kohen can profane themselves for, there are 7 relatives. The Jewish tradition says you are obligated to observe mourning. Father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, and spouse. Those are the 7 relatives that you are obligated to mourn for. Mourning has nothing to do with Kaddish, right? Mourning means that you have to take care of them if possible, if necessary, to bury them. You sit the week of Shiva, which I'll go in more detail in a minute. If it's anyone but your parents, the mourning period is 1 month, 30 days. If it's for your parents, the mourning period is a full year. So what happens is the following: when God forbid a relative that you're obligated to mourn for passes away, your first and major concern is to take care of the deceased. In earlier periods of history, that was absolutely necessary. People lived at small homes. They were together. They didn't die in hospitals. They died at home usually, if they were lucky to to die in bed. So the family would take care of the deceased. Since they're occupied in one of the most important mitzvot of caring for the deceased, they are free from the obligation of all positive mitzvot. So for example, you do not, if you want to eat a piece of bread, you do not say a blessing over bread. You just eat it. You don't say any brachot. You don't recite prayers until the burial. If it's going to be delayed, that's another story. But let us say, because ideally we want to bury as soon as possible. Since we don't embalm, since the body can begin to corrupt, become decompose quickly, especially if it's in a warm climate, we bury as quickly as possible, hopefully within 24 hours. My father, Alav Shalom, passed away at 3 o'clock in the morning. We had his funeral around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Had some delay. Right? And my mother passed away. Everybody had to get there and gather, and so we had to delay it a day. For the honor of the deceased, you can delay the funeral a little bit. And that is generally done today because people can get to the funeral within a day's time usually, and so it's not uncommon to delay it. It's not preferred, but it is not uncommon. All right, so once the person has been buried, at the funeral is the first time the Kaddish is recited. After the burial, well, let me step back. We'll skip that. At this end of the service of the cemetery is when you say the Kaddish the first time. Traditionally, during the week following death, counting the day of death is the first day of the week. That is called the Shiva. Shiva means 7. 7 days you mourn for your beloved. Father, mother, brothers, all of the above. What does that mean? One, it means you stay at home, if at all possible. 2, you do not wear leather shoes. 3, you do not bathe. 4, you do not engage in conjugal relations. Usually what, it depends on the circle. Some people remove their shoes even at the cemetery. Others wait till they get home. What I did leave out is that normally before the burial, at some point, we have what is called kriya, tearing. We tear, traditionally, you would tear an article, your outer garment, your shirt, maybe even your undershirt. If it's your parent, the tear was on the left side above the heart. If it's for any other relative, it's on the right side. Women, there is a sense of modesty, so they often would pin the tear up right away. Men would not necessarily have it pinned up at all. Today, you will see people using ribbons. That's some kind of a custom that I've had to live with it, but it's not the tradition, the whole discussion of how much you have to tear. You have to tear a hand's breadth. These ribbons aren't even a hand wide. But the tradition was to tear an article of clothing. And it's interesting. We see in the literature, they talk about, can you repair the clothing? When can you repair the clothing? What can you do? because clothing, they didn't have a lot of clothes in those days. They didn't have a lot of, so it was important. Maybe you had to repair it. So for your parents, you couldn't repair it. For other relatives, you could repair it. Today, clothing is so relatively cheap, and yet we don't want to tear our clothes. And I think it's more of a misplaced sense of dignity. I don't want to look like a schlub with a torn shirt. It's torn because you have a loss. And it's a symbolic action that is physical, a physical symbol. Yeah, somebody's been torn from you. To tear your clothing to make it concrete is a strong way of dealing with it. During the week, you wear that article of clothing the whole time, or if you have to get something clean on for whatever reason, you tear the new item. You don't wear clean clothes normally. If we live in a world in which people bathe every day, okay, shower every day. So if you can't go for the full week, which most people cannot, so if you have to shower 1, 2, 3, you do it as to get clean and get out. Don't luxuriate in the hot water and then sort of thing. Right? And if you can turn down the water a little bit so it's not quite so comfortable, that's the idea. And you either sit on the floor or you sit on a low stool, a low bench, take the cushion out of a sofa. All of these are the traditional signs of mourning. Since the person is not supposed to leave the house unless absolutely necessary, there's a strong tradition to try and have the daily minyan in the home in the morning and the evening. And then people can come and offer their condolences for your loss. You have an opportunity to share memories and to talk about the deceased. It's a very powerful therapeutic time. It really is. For Shabbat, you go to the synagogue. You take off the clothes of mourning, you put on Shabbos clothes, and when Shabbos is over, you go back to mourning. Because 7 days is always going to include a Shabbat. There's no way you cannot have a Shabbat as part of it. All right? For the 30 days, for everyone, you're supposed to refrain from buying new clothes, from entertainment, from joyful activities, and that is extended for a full year for the parents. For everyone but parents, it's just the 30 days, what we call shloshim, which means 30. For the parents, it's a full year. Okay. And traditionally, one does not cut their hair or shave at least for the 30 days. Traditionally, it says till somebody tells you, you really need a haircut. And most people have friends who will tell them very quickly, you need a haircut. During the full year for parents, one doesn't go to weddings, doesn't go to musics and things like that, and entertainment, you cut back on it. And again, it depends on your community and what's normative and what have you there. Now, there are special things that you have to be aware of. If one of the major holidays is occurring during one of these periods of time, Rosh Hashanah, Pesach, if you have started sitting Shiva before the holiday begins, Shiva is canceled as soon as the holiday begins. So that if you had a funeral in the morning and it's the holiday in the evening, I went to a funeral like that, a former congregant of mine, just this last Erev Pesach. The children sat Shiva for an hour or two in the afternoon, and that was the end of Shiva. And the holiday counts as part, even though you don't sit Shiva during the holiday, you've sat 7 days of Shiva. All right. So once the holiday begins, you've got 21 days left. 23. Okay. If you have finished Shiva and have started Shloshim, which includes the first 7 days. All right, Shloshim always includes the first 7. But you have now finished the Shiva period, which actually we only sit in the morning. Part of the day is considered like the full day. You get up in the morning of the 7th day, you have daven. If you have a minyan at the house or you go to the synagogue, you have the minyan, you come home, take a walk around the block to symbolize you're going back out into the world, and Shiva is over. If that night was a holiday, Shloshim ends. So when a major holiday occurs, whichever stage you're in, except for the full year's mourning, the holiday ends it. If you're in Shiva, the holiday ends Shiva. If you finish Shiva and you're in Shloshim, the holiday ends Shloshim. If you absolutely have to go to work, ideally, you have to at least observe 3 days. The day of the burial, that's first day of Shiva. The next day, it's the second day of Shiva. And the morning, first thing in the morning of the third day, then you can go to work if necessary. You just can't. There's the job says, I'm sorry, you either show up or you don't have a job. All right? But when you come home, you go back to sitting Shiva. In the reform worlds, and also a lot of in the conservative movement, they've adopted this 3 days Shiva. 3 days is not 7, but that's what they could call a Shiva. All right. I don't. What can you do sometimes? But the Shiva is 7 days. Shloshim is 30 days. A year is a year. What happens if somebody passes away in the middle of a holiday? My father, of blessed memory, passed away in the middle of Sukkot. There is nothing more difficult than dealing with the death in the middle of the holidays, because you have the funeral. During Chol Moed, you don't have a funeral on the first, second day, or last 2 days. But in the middle of the holiday season, you have the funeral. You don't sit Shiva until the holiday's over. Then you start Shiva. Now, since the last day of the holiday is not the biblical holiday, it counts as the first day of Shiva. Even though you may not sit Shiva, be sitting Shiva. And to show you, the monkey wrench in my life, my 2 brothers live in Israel. When my father was nifter, when he passed away, we were all there, thank God, to be with him. It was the middle of Sukkot. Since they live in Israel, they don't observe the last day of the holiday. In public, they'd have to observe it, but in private, they don't need to observe it. They could put on tefillin, for example. If they don't normally put on tefillin, they put on tefillin. They could do whatever they would do on any day of the week. So what happened? So Shmini Atzeret, we're all in shul. And Simchat Torah night, which was, believe me, that was the hardest Simchat Torah I ever went through. I went to the synagogue. My 2 brothers put on the torn shirt, sat Shiva. When we came home, we would make it public, so they had to put a robe on over their torn shirt. Okay, so we got to count that day as a day of Shiva. They actually sat that day as a day of Shiva. So we see that there are a number of things associated with the rituals around death that are very, very therapeutic. We know that there are stages that people go through. There's a classical stages of mourning, whether or not they're 100% accurate, but there's denial, there's anger, There's acceptance is the last one. Depression. Well, depression, I think, is all the whole time. But yeah, the Kubler-Ross has this thing. Yeah, you're often very angry. Sometimes you're angry at the deceased, especially if they did something that my father, blessed in memory, was 75 years old. He was not a youngster. He had no business climbing up on that platform, which he climbed up on and ended up falling off, and which caused his accident, which caused his ultimate death. Okay, so I'm sure there was a little bit of anger that we had. Why'd you do something so stupid, Dad? All right. And you could be angry and mourning at the same time and crying your heart out for them. And no two people mourn the same way. No two people follow the same stages. I don't think that that's 100% this idea of the stages. It's, yes, there's an accuracy to it, but the mourning ritual gives us a way of handling things. You know, what do you do? One of the things that ritual does for us, it gives us a way of dealing with crises. The death of a loved one is a big crisis in our life. By having these rules of the ritual that surrounds it, it gives us a way of dealing with it and making our ways through it. Psychologically, it is really a tremendous methodology of therapy under normal circumstances. And it recognizes that at first you don't want to be with the world. But you know what? You can't stay away from the world the whole time. You do have to go back out to the world. And you know, it's not time for, you know, celebrating. I just don't feel like it. I don't feel like dancing. And you don't. You're not allowed to for a period of time. And as time goes by, the pain does ease. It may never go away completely, and you'll be reminded of it. And as I tell people, it's always a roller coaster. Your emotions are going to go up and down, and that's normal. And this gives you a framework to try and at least make your way through it. So the Jewish ritual of mourning is really one of the greatest gifts that we have in Judaism.
Sorry.
Yes, go.
So he passed during Sukkot. So your brother sat Shiva for that morning.
That night, it started that night, actually.
That night.
Yeah.
Oh, so they continue on through Sukkot.
No, what happened was he passed away Chol HaMoed, the middle of Sukkot.
Yeah.
So we did Kriya, we did it at the hospital. We all knew what we were doing, all right? We had the funeral. We didn't do any of the mitzvot in the morning. Because we're mourning, we didn't put away the lulav and etrog, et cetera, et cetera. We got back in time for mincha. We should daven mincha. My brother is trying to get me to realize that I should daven musaf also, but my mind was somewhere else. Right. So this was Thursday. Right. So Yom Tov, I think, was Sunday night. I don't remember enough, but anyway, we didn't sit shul. We went to shul. We said Kaddish. Okay, and we had lit the light, but we didn't sit shiva.
Okay, so you don't.
You don't sit shiva. You don't do anything. And people don't come to the house to offer you condolences. But the last night, which for us was still Yom Tov, but for them was no longer Yom Tov, they started sitting shiva.
Okay, so afterwards you did.
Yeah, and afterwards we did. The full week for everyone. It's very difficult. And I understand why some people can't do it.
So it was the remaining days that you had.
Well, we had to sit 7 days.
Yeah. Okay.
So
after the holiday you sat.
What it was is, since the last day of the holiday is Yom Tov Sheni Shagalia, the second day of the holiday is only a rabbinic addition, right? It's a minhag that we follow.
Yeah.
It did count as a day towards Shiva.
Okay.
But we didn't sit Shiva. But my brothers, who were not celebrating, sat Shiva. And so that's different.
If they're in Israel.
Yeah, when Israel, if they had been in Israel, there would be just a day of the week, and then you go on sitting Shiva. Here, because it was the second day of Yontiv, we didn't sit Shiva, but we continue with, and we all got up from Shiva at the same time.
Okay, so then afterwards you could.
Yeah, all the same, continue.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, there are all kinds of issues when people live in different countries and far away, and they're not there for the funeral. So now, one question that I'm often asked is, when somebody converts to Judaism, what do I do about my parents? Do I say Kaddish? Do I sit Shiva? And the answer, I think the correct answer is, first of all, it depends on what your parents would feel. Okay? Since they're not Jewish and Jewish ritual is not part of their life, they might not feel comfortable with you saying Kaddish. So you don't. Do you mourn them? Yes. They're your parents. Just today, I'm listening to a podcast talking about conversions and a relationship between a person who converts to Judaism and their parents. Just today, I was listening to exactly that, in which one of the important rabbis, Moshe Feinstein, says, you basically have to show them respect. Technically, you don't have to, in the Torah sense of how we respect our parents as Jewish law tells us to respect them, but you have to honor your parents no matter what. It may not be exactly the same thing, but they're your parents. So that's a question that I get, and I say to people, you talk with how your parent would feel about it. If they would feel honored that you wanted to say Kaddish on their behalf, nothing wrong with that. If you want to say the Mali Rachamim or any of the memorial prayers for them, that's fine. Okay. Traditionally, only men said Kaddish. In all the conservative synagogues in town, in the Reform synagogues in town, women say Kaddish. A lot of Orthodox women today say Kaddish. They may not say it very loudly, and they're on the other side of the Mechitza, but a lot of women say Kaddish today, even in the Orthodox circles. What happens if the individual is someone that you've terribly you've had issues with? Let us say it's an abusive parent. Okay? God forbid any of you have anything like that. You seek advice from your rabbi on how to deal with it. You may not be able to mourn for them. I know of cases where, there's no sense in saying, there's no way you would mourn for such an individual. And I don't think in such a case there's an obligation. If you just have a falling out with a sibling or what have you like that, or maybe the mourning would be helpful to you. Can't be sure. If you are divorced, there's no obligation to sit Shiva. If you are still married and separated, there's still an obligation to sit Shiva. Although if the relationship is that broken, maybe you can't. So I think that's the basic parameters. Are there any questions anybody have?
So basically, sorry, you could.
Oh, go ahead. I'm in a kind of a situation right now where I attend shul and, I haven't finished my conversion. I wanted to say Shiva on behalf of my mother-in-law, who I was very close to. Is that, I've been doing it.
You mean say Kaddish?
Oh, well, I mean, is that permitted, or is that acceptable, or because I'm in a
You ask the community that you're in with. Ask the rabbi. Don't step on any of the rabbi's toes.
yes.
Okay. There's nobody else to say Kaddish?
Not in my, no, well, not in my.
No. your mother, her side.
Her family rabbi.
Yeah, that's so it's not absolutely necessary. So there's somebody saying Kaddish.
Oh.
You wanted to say the El Mali Rachamim like that, or Yizkor, that'd be fine, I think. The problem with Kaddish is, again, the purpose of Kaddish is for the community to respond Yehei Shmei Rabbah.
Mhm.
And to be fair, to be honest, you don't say Yehei Shmei Rabbah to somebody who's not Jewish making a statement of for God. That's a response to a Jew saying it. All right. Yeah, I gotta be honest. You wouldn't like me to do anything else. All right. Now, next week we meet here again. In 2 weeks, we will be meeting at the mikveh. I will send out a note giving you directions and where to meet for the mikveh. It will not be online. If I remember, I might take some videos of the mikveh itself just so I have it on my channel, so you can see it there. But we will meet depending on how many people actually show up. We either 1 or 2 groups go into the mikveh area itself. I give you the grand tour. Nobody goes into the mikveh unless you fall in and bring a towel with you, please. And then we arrange for a classroom to go over and talk. Usually finish early. Okay, but it is a bit north of here. It is on Atkinson, just south of Center, and I will give you the directions, everything. And if people have problems getting there, maybe you can work it out with others to go together somehow. Okay. Anything else? Anybody?
No,
Okay.
excuse me, Rabbi. So I want to understand well. So we will have a class at a mikvah.
Speak up a little louder, Edith.
Oh,
I can't quite hear you.
I was saying, I want to understand better. We will have a class in 2 weeks at a mikvah.
Yes.
Got it now. Thank you.
They're usually arranged for a classroom there, and we meet there as a class afterwards.
I
Okay.
understand. Thank you.
All righty. Good night, everybody.
Laila Tov, everyone.